begin, please. This is the first of a series of Emmons Distinguished Professor Fellowship lectures that the college will be holding this spring. As some of you may or may not know, the Emmons Professorship is shared by the colleges on a rotating basis. This is our year for the Emmons Professorships, which are named after and supported by the late John Emmons, who was president of Ball State University. I first got to know Bob Scarfo, not personally, directly, but through an article that he had written in Landscape Architecture magazine. And it was in that article that Bob challenged us to look at our professional connectedness with the direct act of our practice as so-called stewards of the land, or stigbarks, as I remember from an ancient Anglo-Saxon or Saxon word, which actually meant keeper of the pigs. But we've come a long way from that. And Bob's challenge in that particular article was that perhaps we need to take stock of just how far we have been removed from our direct contact and direct involvement with that which we proclaim and we practice. And it was from that article and some similar thoughts that I was developing that I eventually had the opportunity to meet Bob in person and shared a panel at SELA in Rhode Island a few years later. And we found some commonality at that particular section as well, and that was great fun. Bob is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts with a BLA and MLA. He has a PhD in social geography from Clark University in Massachusetts. He has practiced in the East Coast of Canada with a number of professional firms and has over the years been mixing his practice with his teaching. He has taught at Kentucky, at Guelph University, and is currently head of a landscape architecture program in the horticulture department. Is that correct? Yes, at the University of Maryland. We're delighted to have Bob with us for these 8 weeks as the distinguished Emmons Professor in Landscape Architecture, Bob Scarfo.
This is weird. I'm not used to using a microphone at all. Can you hear me okay up in the back there? Or this is okay, great. I want to, the aesthetic carrying capacity, the subject I want to talk about, I'll introduce a little bit more of how it came about in a few minutes. I want to kick this off with a little bit of your participation, in a sense, in trying to get you into the right context for what I'm going to share with you and what I'll say. The first part of context that I want you to try to get into is that what I'm going to talk about deals primarily with a majority of what we will influence as designers, and that is everyday life. What I will talk about has its applications to monumentality and to landscapes and buildings dealing with celebration. But my concern over the years, since my first design studio, and I can remember it vividly, given my first design project, I wanted to know why someone would want whatever it was I was going to give them. And I've been working on that ever sins. And so daily life, everyday life, is the context. Within that context, I'd like you to imagine yourself, now this is the audience participation part. I'd like you to imagine yourself leaving for Europe or leaving on a vacation for 2 or 3 months. You and I are good friends, and we've come to an agreement that I will house sit for you or apartment sit for you while you're away. You've been away for the 2 or 3 months. You're coming back on a Saturday afternoon. I cleaned out and cleaned up the Saturday morning. And so when you come back to your apartment or your house, I'm not there. What are some of the things that you will find or experience when you come into your house over the next hour or so, a couple of hours? Yeah?
It's going to smell different.
Okay, there'll be a different smell. What else? Yeah. Rearrangement of what? Okay. So things will be rearranged, or rearrangement of things. What else? What's some other ways of describing what you'll find? Yeah.
Food in cupboards.
What about it?
Eat it all. Different food like refrigerator,
Okay, different kinds of foods and things in the refrigerators and cabinets. Yeah, I'm back here.
whether the toilet paper goes like on the outside.
Okay, whether it rolls that way or whether it comes off the top or comes off the bottom. Good, good. You're designing what for a living? Foods? Yeah.
Pets might behave differently.
Pets might behave differently. Your pets. Okay. Why? Traumatized. Is this a reference to my dog? I want to know who paid that sign. What's this? Anything else? Yeah. A lot of mail to go through. Okay, so you're on the right track. This has shown up a number of times when I've asked the question. There is an odor or aroma. The foods that I eat and the way I cook might be different, and I'm going to strangle myself. So there's an aura and an aroma that's different. Things are rearranged. A lot of times somebody might phrase it in terms of things are out of place. The spaces are different. The place is different. Little signals. Toilet paper on the top or the bottom. Or maybe it's just a cardboard roll that's left. Foods and pets. These are the aspects of everyday life that I think we tend to forget as designers. These, when you come into your house, you will most likely be rearranging things in order to do what? Stake your territory, reclaim it. What? I'm sorry? Feel at home again. These are the aspects of design that I think we have tended to lose track of. And yet, when we're not sitting at a drafting table or a computer station, we live these things day in and day out. If I went and worked with you at your drafting table or wherever you are in this building, and while we were working together, I happened to move some of your papers just slightly. Within 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes after I leave, what are you going to do? Consciously or unconsciously? Move it back. Bring it back into place. Into your place, into the place that you identify with, that you find meaningful to you and that reflects you as a person. My partner and I did a design for a couple in Toronto, and we got one of the most dramatic senses of spatial personality. The husband, as he described his desires to us, made us imagine, he wanted, and he used the words, the plants would overhang the spaces. He wanted small enclosures, and we happened, as we talked with him, we saw his work area in the house, and there were things, it was organized chaos, and things were hanging out and dripping over, and we called him warm and cuddly, not to his face, but that helped us imagine this person. His wife was just the opposite. Her kitchen was geometrically clean and precise. It was all white. White floor, white cabinets, white ceiling. We called her 2001. It was the whiteout scene from the movie 2001. And so these were their places. And these were the qualities of design that sometimes I think as designers, when we're out of our daily life, when we're out of ourselves, civilian selves, and into our designer selves, we tend to forget that my place is in a different arrangement than your place. So quality of life is what the aesthetic carrying capacity is all about. Quality of life in a broader definition, of the word fit, and I'll come back to that as I go along. The character of the environments that we inhabit retain a character over time. And now I use the word retain now, particularly when I'm back home, when I'm talking with people in the Maryland Historic Trust and the National Trust for Historic Preservation and some of the environmental groups. Instead of preservation, I talk about retention. Retention leaves the door open for change, but you're still holding on to the character. And this is what I'll deal with in some of the slides here. The character of your environments you reinforce on a daily basis through your routines. So when we talk about the maintenance of a site, it's not just the subscribed or prescribed maintenance program that is done by, Jiffy Green and the white guys that and the gang that shows up in a truck and squirts everything and mows it and cuts it and runs off to the next site. That's maintenance on one level, but you maintain your sense of identity, your sense of meaning, and your sense of place or orientation every day by rearranging the pieces of paper and the chairs and the pencils, and most of the time without even thinking about it. You reinforce through routine your existence. And over time, it changes slightly. And so there is the retention of your character in the spaces and things and places that you carry with you. In applying the aesthetic carrying capacity, again, the idea of fit, the idea of putting things into a place in such a way that ideally no one knows that they're new. I can't think of his name now. The landscape architect, he just retired from TAC. He was there for 25 years. And he was the first one to say what I'd been thinking for a while, but he said it out loud. He says, to him, the best design is a design that no one knows was designed. Now again, I'm not talking monumentality and celebration and things of that nature. The application of an aesthetic carrying capacity, the idea that there are thresholds of acceptability. I can move things just so much on her desk, beyond which she's going to start moving them back quicker and sooner, or start giving me dirty looks, or tell me to get the hell away from her desk. So there are thresholds of acceptability. Those thresholds of acceptability for the arrangement where you live, the outdoors or the indoors, where you work, is part of my definition of aesthetics. Aesthetics is not just, the elite don't have Aesthetics is her with her feet up on the chair. Aesthetics is some of you currently sitting on your left cheek and you're about to switch over to your right cheek because you want to get more comfortable. You want a mundane aesthetic, everyday aesthetic experience. So you slide back, lift up, things like that. That's bringing aesthetics into the everyday world. With the application of being comfortable, new development and commercial development that reflects a place's traditional local character is more likely to harmoniously blend with the existing ecology, and I'll come back to this. It is more likely to fit into the local and regional settings. It is more likely to extend the existing residents' sense of identity, their value systems, and local heritage, and to perpetuate local people's daily acts of what Rappaport calls personalization, what Giddens calls real regionalization. Aesthetic carrying capacity provides the criteria, and that's what we'll get at with the slides, provides the criteria needed to evaluate the amount and kinds of changes that an existing community or region can support without losing its sense of identity. An ecology that includes people includes place, that defines habitat denotes heritage, that measures objects delineates local expression, and that identifies the organization of interrelationships in all of those things, recognizes human life as an integral part of the cultural landscape. The aesthetic carrying capacity, what I'm trying to do is, I'm tired of there being departments of natural ecology and departments of social ecology, and they don't talk to each other. So really what they should do is say departments of natural 0.5 ecology, maybe. And socially we're half of ecology. So you'll get half a degree when you finish. Ecology is everything in all of us. It's not separating out, and then the departments don't talk to each other because they create their own languages and things like that. You know? So ecology keeps getting broken up into all these little compartments. I first began to realize this when I was asked to study, the state of Maryland attempted to produce a statewide master plan. They started in 1988, and I was asked to read a draft of it and respond to it. I read it, and I knew something was missing. They had all the right words though. Quality of life, stewardship, visions, you know, it's just dripping with nice stuff. But there was something missing. And so I started looking in the text for how they defined quality of life. Then I began to realize quality of life was defined in terms of heavy metals, air pollution, water quality, transportation. And what was then really interesting is I began to realize that they were defining quality of life in physiological terms. So then I started looking for sense of place terms. They weren't there. And so if this statewide master plan had passed, the state would have had carte blanche, they would have just been able to go ahead and do what they wanted to do in sense of homogenizing the state of Maryland. Now the state of Maryland has the coastal area, it has the Piedmont, which is pretty much split urban and rural, and then there's the mountains. And already some of the homogenization is taking place, but this might have promoted it. Because given the same objects, if I gave all of you the same 12 or 15 objects to design or decorate your living space, we would most likely come up with 120 or 130 different final arrangements. But you'd have all the same things. Physiologically, you'd have shelter and all, you know, the good stuff. But you would arrange it in different ways. That's a different or broader definition of ecology and what can be brought in. I just want to quickly add one thing and we'll get into the slides. What I began to realize is that they were talking about physiology, and what I had to do was come up with another kind of ecology or addendum to their ecological definitions. And I began to think about different things and came up with what I call the aesthetic carrying capacity. The idea that there are thresholds beyond which, if I design an environment for you that is not acceptable, does not reflect your sense of personal biography, cultural heritage, it doesn't reflect the character of your environment, your spaces that are meaningful to you, what will you do when I'm done with the job? Rearrange it. You'll start to change it. So my argument to the state planners in Maryland was that in fact, they were looking to probably have to build in a greater police force, more planners, to cause people not to rearrange the environments that might be designed for them over a period of time, unless they designed within the local traditional characters of those places. The same kind of definition is ecological definition of carrying capacity, beyond which there is a degradation, beyond which you will degrade the environment I designed for you or I work to bring to you. Al, you want to? This is going to be wild. I've never seen these slides this big before. The Earth has needs. The Earth can speak to us, and we think about it in terms of natural sciences. But then we recognize there are people. But coming at it from a natural science point of view, we tend to enclose them in measurable things, in dimension things, when in fact they aren't still lights. They're often, they're moving through the woods, and they're creating space as they go along. To bring life together with mathematics sometimes produces some interesting senses of identity. The pride that comes from reinforcing one's place is something that I think we have to bring into design to a greater extent. By the standards that Maryland produced in the first draft of their paper, I don't know if you can see him. I didn't get the point. There's right in the center of the slide at the back rail there is a gentleman standing there. He has been living in that dumpster for the 6 years that I've been at Maryland. Physiologically, his needs are obviously being met. Does he live in the character, or does his environment evoke a sense of identity with you people? There's something missing, but he meets the definition of quality of life physiologically, or a definition. In the sense of working from the inside, though, in the sense of gaining or providing or building on a sense of identity, there was a project at Rutgers University back in 1969. We had the money for the sod and the plants that we put in, but we didn't have enough money to put it in. So we suggested to the or to Rutgers University that maybe the students could do it. There were 4 buildings around this quad, and this was the day before, Friday afternoon, at 8 o'clock the next morning, we assembled, or the people who lived there assembled, and we worked together for about 6, 7, 8 hours. And at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this was what the place looked like. Now, it was really interesting. Little signs showed up. One of them said, "Keep your ass off the grass." And if somebody even dared to step on the sod for the next week or so, they got yelled at from 3 or 4 or 5 windows. People were watching over their environment. We made a mistake, though. In fact, I'll just add that there were even, back then in '69, there were even a group of the Black Panthers who were involved in this and staked out a piece of the territory. We made a mistake, though. Within 3 years, the place looked like the original slides. You can all guess why. The mistake we made was we didn't allow people to reinforce their stake in the environment. We didn't make it an annual event. And so the people who moved out took their memories with them. The people who moved in didn't have a stake in the environment, and it started to go downhill. So we didn't work enough from the inside over that period of time. And so aesthetic carrying capacity deals with time and insubstantial. The thing, again, remember, we're visually oriented professions. It deals with smell, it deals with sound and the influence of sound, and this has always fascinated me because even in the ad with the glass moving across, the thing that they can communicate sound through a visual. That means to me that there is so much more that we can communicate through the actual incorporation of the five senses that make up local character. Time again, from the same spot a few months later, and understanding how to read these signs in an environment when I go and visit it and do an inventory. An inventory isn't just looking at what's there, it's looking at what the signals are of what is there or has been there over a longer period of time. Interesting thing, too, that brought me to the aesthetic carrying capacity was standing in a cathedral in Nuremberg, and they had 8-foot-tall photographs of what the cathedral looked like at the end of the Second World War. No walls, just a few of the columns standing. And yet I was standing in the cathedral. Heritage in Europe means so much more than it means here. Heritage here is the tallest steeple in New England, in Arlington, Massachusetts, burning down the year before the bicentennial, and it being replaced with this. That's heritage. I might go there for a doctor's appointment, but I don't know if I'd go there for spiritual guidance. Character of places, character of spaces and things, character and heritage for different people in different places. If you can't read it up in the back, it says medieval street in Perugia, Italy. Its charms are obvious only to the passing tourist. Again, the insider versus the outsider, and being able to bring them together and understand it. This is a recently renovated home in Warren, Massachusetts, and just down the street from it, in terms of transition, another one in the background, and you can see then a little bit of the more recent streetscape. And if you're looking at this and you turn about 180 degrees, you see some of the new Warren, literally from the same vantage point, just turning. This is what's going on in a lot of these communities. Now, maybe we don't have input in it, but the planners there should have had some input into it. Zoning ordinance language can incorporate the aspects of the aesthetic carrying capacity. I've done this with students and with planners in some of the counties in Maryland. This is at the on Y Island, on the eastern shore of Maryland, and directly across the street from it, we have new development. I always love the end gables of these houses. It's like it's winking at you as you go by. This, to me, is the greatest metaphor of what I'm getting at. This is in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. What is underneath the new roof is the old family business, the barn, the shotgun house out front, and it is being, in order to keep the business going, well, they got more space. They enclosed it in a corrugated walled structure. This is the greatest metaphor for what's happening with our heritage and how we're dealing with so much of our space. It's something like Macaulay might draw, only it's real. Say goodbye. In Bolton, Massachusetts, they're working a little bit more with the local character. The local character of Bolton, carried back into the 1700s, is homes that are set back from the street, farmhouses set back from the streets. There is, if you want to call it, green spaces or whatever the wordage that we use is. That's the local high school, and they have maintained up close to the street, down just a little further from This is part of the yard in front of the school, looking across to the post office, set back from the street. In Maryland, it wouldn't be set back. In Maryland, they clear cut those pines and then they just build it and get it done with and move on. A little ways down the street, shot closer one of the post office, a little ways down the street is a new residential development within the past 10 years. If you want to call it a street-side hedgerow, and this is adding to the ecological diversity of Bolton in that area, it's allowing, if you've read Lauren Isley at all, one of his stories talks about the life along the edge of the street and the way it moves around and watches you go by. But you'll notice the driveway over here. You can see one house in the background. As you move down the street and look in the driveway, you begin to see a little bit more of what's back there, in character with a lot of the rest of Bolton. Again, part of the same development, the next main driveway going in. It's a common driveway. You can look in and you begin to see more of what's there. I don't know why I put this in there. I think it says something about our attitude towards life. But in Plymouth, Massachusetts, this is some of the existing housing. Well, it's all existing housing. What can I say? Some of the older housing. You can tell the older housing. Again, there are signals. There are signals that tell you about the time and the period of when it might have been built. And you begin to see newer and newer homes because there's more sky and there's less trees and there's more clear cutting, and maybe things either haven't grown back or they just were never allowed to grow in the first place. One of the newest ones finished just 2 years ago. Now that was all wooded right up to where I took the picture from. This is some of the latest stuff. You have your requisite gates. I don't know what the heck that's supposed to mean. But again, you can see the edge of what was there versus what is there now. This isn't Plymouth, Massachusetts, but it is. I had fun writing the letter to the town council, the selectmen on this one. I was just so moved by it, I had to vent it somehow. I appreciated their retention of the heritage of Plymouth and its ecology. Okay, I want you to look at the next series of about 5 slides, and I want you to try to think about what is common to all of them. Okay, I'll go backwards now. Again, take another look. What are some of the commonalities to all of these? Louder?
Greenery clustered around the house.
Okay, greenery, clustered foundation plantings, poodle cuts, John says. 2-story mostly, with a peak somewhere up around the 3rd story. Human scale. How can you define human scale more clearly? What's that? I can't put that into zoning ordinance language. You're right, though. So what do you see that allows you to say that? It has a porch. What else? Somebody else said something. The setbacks are a particular, or there is a parameter to the setbacks. In fact, on these streets, I'll show you a slide in a few minutes, on these streets, the setback is such, and the width of the road is such, that from front door to front door, it's only 70 feet. Too far. Well, somebody over here said something. What? The shutters is a detail you can see and begin to delineate character for all these houses are on one street. and there are trees out front too. Now the trees out front in this case, I don't know if any of these slides show it. Yeah, you begin to see it here. They are primarily in the green strip, not in the front yard. These are tiny little things. But if a house comes in and is built in there, and one of the things no one's mentioned is all of them have at least 3 colors, or 3 tone or shades of the same color. Where I come from in Maryland, there's, with luck, 2 colors. Different quality. The angles to the roofs. There are angles on these roofs, whereas there are different angles and different orientations. So orientation relative to street, setback, these are measurable things that you can observe and set parameters to guide new development in this neighborhood or in this area.
No garage.
No garage. Actually, they all have garages. They're all to the back, and they all have driveways alongside them. Yeah, somebody over here?
They all have chimneys.
There are chimneys with all of them. This, Al, can you focus it just like, this is about 1.5 miles away. Those homes are in Belmont, Massachusetts. This is about 1.5 miles away, about 3/4 mile inside Harvard Square on Mass Ave in Cambridge. It's just been, the whole complex has just been rehabilitated. And what's the difference? Would those houses fit in this neighborhood? No. Setbacks different. You could say quickly, the architecture is different. Well, that just covers a multitude of sins. You haven't looked close enough if you leave it at that. We could call it a mansard roof. Well, if someone doesn't know what a mansard is, then you can start giving different kinds of dimensions, proportions, relative proportions and stories, the number of, or the approximate number of straight lines versus vertical lines versus diagonal lines. And again, you can come up with ratios for these things. What I'm moving you into is looking at these environments in terms of basic design. Lines, planes, textures. This is going back to the original street, and you can see the street tree planting. Now, you can see the street tree planting. You can see the interesting thing. Now you get the setbacks, and again, they're approximately 70 feet from door to door, going across the street. The thing you notice too, if you look close enough, is there are no curbs. One street over from where I live in Maryland, there are curbs. Now there are street tree plantings all along the greenway, and then there's a sidewalk. But on my street, there is no sidewalk. The curb is different, and the trees on my street are all over the front yards. The interesting thing that they do, that we again tend to forget, is you now begin to get patterns of shade and light. That adds to the character of the place. In Prince Frederick, in Calvin County in Maryland, I know before I get to a part of the county that there's new development up ahead, because the majority of the streets are tree covered, and the density of shade versus light, and when you buy Zipatone, you buy it at different densities, and you have numbers to identify that. Do you ever think of shade being cast that way? It is, though. And I can see down these darkened tunnels in Calvert County, and I can see light up ahead. And I'll bet you money there's new development there, and the trees have been cut back away from the street, and what's happening is the texture on the ground's changing, the canopy and sense of enclosure is changing, the density of the vegetation is changing, the amount of light I can see through the peripheral vision upward is changing. And if it's this, in some places like in Belmont, it's pretty much the shaft of light or shaft of openness. In Calvert County, it goes back even further because of the houses being set back further, etc. These are all observable qualities that you can use to define character, local character. I won't go through all these on the street. We started to do it. I want to get into some questions here. But these are the houses along the street that I live on, and they're smaller than the ones that were in Belmont. Almost all of them have gables, at least 3. A lot of them are brick on the bottom. The setback on this street is 120 to 130 feet from front door to front door. Not the setback, but the distance across the street. What I'm trying to get at with a set of carrying capacity is that if we allow ourselves to be carried away by labels and by more of the, what we call sometimes the empirical approach or positivistic or the scientific approach, we tend to build facades behind which life continues on in different forms and different characters. I think that if we can build in, and like I said, I've done it in workshops with the planners in Maryland, with some planners and with my students, and we have built in local traditional character into the zoning language in some of these counties, so that there are parameters for new development that still allow development to take place, still allow developers to make close to, if not the same, profit, the numbers of units, etc., but in a way that retains local character. If we don't do this and we contribute to the continuation of physiologically defining quality of life, then I think, like I found in Athens, Georgia, the sign's there, and we may be headed down Paradise Way only to find ourselves, all of us who would like to say it more precise or more positively, oh, well, we're in a cul-de-sac. The hell with it. It's not a cul-de-sac. It's a dead end. That's, I can say some more on it, but I'd really like to, if we can get the lights, I'd really like to entertain any questions that you have. Because, like I say, this idea applies to new development as well as the retention of older development. Are there any questions? John?
You probably run into some of the writings of James Rose, who was talking about almost the criminality of the front garden. The idea of the open space there is essentially pretense and wasting space that ought to be more incorporated in private use of the residential property. Your comments about that?
John's question was regarding Rose's writings about the front yard and private space, and that it should be more incorporated into the use of the residence. I can't agree with that, any of that as a rule. Let me back up a second. One of the major awakenings that I had came from a Marxist geographer, a French Marxist. Henri Lefebvre writes about the social implications of space. And one, I don't usually memorize things, but the one thing that it just blew me away when I read it. One of his comments in an article, and I think it's on the bibliography, the article's on the bibliography here, he said, space is a social product. If the spaces in the neighborhoods or the communities I'm going into are not as used as they might be, then I don't want to violate that tradition. If there is an upswell or a groundswell of desire to do more with front yards, then I would go with that, as opposed to bringing in this, hey, this is a good thing. Well, what's good for you may not be good for me. Here's an example. The house that I live in Maryland, I won't go back. It was the one with the columns on the front door, and there's plantings about halfway between the house and the road. So I've been making a space in front of the house, separate from right out by the road. My intention is, because it's on top of a hill, there's more breezes there through the summer than there is in the backyard. I'm building a patio out front. And it's neat because people walk their dogs, and I grew up with a front porch. I don't have it now, but I eat breakfast sitting out on the front steps. you know, and you get to talk to people, and there's the street life. I was told, in talking with some friends who have lived in Maryland longer than I have, only black people sit out front. And I was told in that way, it was like, hey, you know, think about what you're doing. Because, hey, what do I care? I want to use my front yard, you know. I'm going to be introducing a greater use to the front yard, but although the plantings are in character with the rest of the neighborhood. But this is the idea. I'm doing it knowing I'm violating something. And maybe that's the answer to your question. I would feel more comfortable that you did it knowing that that wasn't the tradition in the place, but then maybe going about in a way to begin to introduce something new. Yes?
You highlighted today's mostly rural and residential contexts. What are some differences in dealing with these contexts and within urban contexts?
A couple of my students, when I gave the assignment the first time, in fact, because they were living in DC, used the neighborhoods they were living in and looked at it in terms of infill. Now, there have been some studies coming out of Rhode Island on this, and they've done little graphics of local character and so forth with rooftops. It works. It still works. If you're going to do infill, then you look at density and you look at density around there, but you look at the buildings and the setbacks and things like that in terms of character of the spaces, character of the lines, proportions to windows. Georgetown is different than the northeast area of Washington and different than the southeast area of Washington. So it can be applied in those settings. And it can be applied in a way, one of the things, as a result of this whole idea, I've been pushing and doing workshops in Maryland because I believe the local people, even by doing whatever they feel comfortable with, we put them in a situation of or adding to the design of their neighborhoods. They give us the data, the value bases that we can then use to either, as we say, educate them, but through an understanding, first they've educated us, an understanding of where they're coming from. But then too, using lines and using graphics and saying, well, is this acceptable? This is actually where I'm going. So it works in urban settings. But this is where I'm going, and if anybody wants to get a head start on it, fine, be my guest. I want to, and actually Ann Henderson has shown her class some of this that's been done, but not to this end. You have the capability with the computers to digitize slides. Work with a neighborhood, digitize eye-level photographs of the neighborhoods, and then start changing the density of trees and reproduce new photographs off of that, or change the colors or the swath of colors to the houses. Find the thresholds of what's acceptable in density of tree trunks at eye level versus density of canopy, and things of that nature. I want to go to the point where we start showing there are thresholds of acceptability, and then I want to start working with some medical people because I believe that if I move her paper too much, I start contributing to stress, which is physiologically measurable. And I want to get into public health with this. That's where I'm going with it. Yes?
Is there some possibility that you can't design new things that have character, but that you can design to accommodate flexibility over time, where character would evolve? And, you know, you can institutionalize it, but if people don't want to make it their own, or if they don't embellish it, or if they don't understand that it's something that's there to change, then you're just going to end up with something that's institutional, but it will take on the whole character.
Malcolm's question is, can you design something that maybe doesn't embody the character, but is flexible enough to change over time, and I can't think of the word, not adopt, but evolve into a character of its own? Yeah, sure. I would argue, though, really, that what I'm hearing you say is that there are levels of character. And I could design in a sense, a skeletal or framework character that is drawn from the existing surroundings, and then allow people to begin to add themselves to it over a period of time.
You know, we've seen pictures of 11 kind of gap when it was just built, but all of a sudden,
Sure.
the house has been personalized.
Sure.
To the trees in the front yard, match the back of every house is the same. Aren't a lot of those older neighborhoods that you all
places like that that are all the same. And my uncle got caught by the police climbing through a window into his house in a neighborhood like that, and the reason was it wasn't his house. He had missed by one house. And he had left his keys, and then instead of waking his wife up, he went through the bathroom window and literally was halfway through when somebody started tugging on his leg from the outside, and it was the boys in blue. It's the Levittowns, sure. What we have to remember, though, is, again, we can't look at them purely as design. Levittown is the result of a tremendous educational program that was developed in the late 40s by three industries. Gas industry, the rubber industry, and the auto industry. And it is documented, there are articles on this, and if you want to look back at the Senate subcommittee hearings on, there were millions of dollars slated for inner city development at the end of Second World War, in 1947-48. Within 2 years, that was slashed to almost nothing, and it was moved outside the city. And the industries that lobbied heaviest for this move in different ways, they didn't go in and say, hey, we want you to move out there. But they started to change our value system to the point now where Andreas Dwani talks about how we have homogenized neighborhoods into classes and areas, and he'll show slides, an aerial slide where you have to drive. This house is, you know, a football field away from a grocery store, but you have to get in your car, drive a mile and a half around to get back in. What we may think is good or bad. Where am I going with this? One, yes, we can do what you say in terms of design to lesser degrees and allow people to give it character over time, and we will accept it over time. In Waterford, Virginia, it is one of three communities that are on the historic register, and there is in the center part of downtown, there is a pink house. It was painted pink in 1949 before it became anybody thought of history, and the people went crazy. But now when you go to Waterford, and it's on the historic register, when you go to Waterford, the current owners were talking about, when you go to Waterford, everybody gives you directions and buy the pink house. Well, when you get to the pink house, you do this. And after you do that, you're well over. The current owners wanted to bring it back to its natural color combination. The community won't let them do it. The pink house is a sense of identity now. They won't let another pink house come in. You know, maybe help for directions further down the road. Any others? Just finish with one thing. The aesthetic carrying capacity, again, if you work within tradition, and these words are important, local traditional character, it has come about over time and has brought about a certain kind of ecology in terms of natural sciences. Farmers and residents over time have worked, and it didn't work, so they changed it. And if you read Woollen's new book, or relatively new book, Second Nature, he deals with this really well. And so this change, this ebb and flow, this give and take, is ecology. It's an ecology that covers the three things: science, society, what is normal and what is accepted on a grander scale, and aesthetics. Aesthetics, defined by the social scientists, is expression, self-expression. And so all of you express yourselves as individuals within certain normative rules that are accepted by society. And then you apply technology to the construction of these things that help you express yourself. So it's a span of the three areas of knowledge, and that's in the handout there, is why those three areas are there: science, society, and aesthetics. And I think we can begin to bring the three of them together if we realize the part they play when we change the direction of the roll of toilet paper or whatever it is we do. Thank you.